Good morning, everyone, or at least where I am, good morning. So, good day to you. I really had to stop doing the Good Morning Vietnam part. I was about to do it, and I'm glad I didn't. Anyway, hi, welcome. Thank you so much for coming back. Day two of our Spring One tour, the inaugural Spring One tour. We have Nate Schutta and Jakub Pilimon talking to us some more cloud native architecture. Yesterday, they presented some fantastic thoughts, and your homework was to put it all into a question that you wanted answered. So some of the questions from the Q&A yesterday we went over, and we have ready. Yvonne's gonna uh, toss those over to Nate and to Jakub. But if you have any other questions, please go into the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer those. So again, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. We only have about 45 minutes or so with these two fine gentlemen, but we will try and answer as many as we can and have a good time while doing it. All right. So hope everybody's got their beverage of choice, their comfortable chair, and their thinking caps on. I hand it over to you. Well, good morning, Nate. Good morning, Jakub. Good morning, Ivan. How are you all?
Good morning,
Good
good
morning.
afternoon, friends. Since our main
Oh,
man
right.
Jakub
That's
here
right.
is
Good
not, in
afternoon,
fact, in the
Tor.
same country as the rest of us.
Hello.
Hi, Jacob. Good evening.
Well, I
Glad.
would say it's afternoon still. It's sunny. It's 6 p.m. Yeah, we've been talking about that lately.
Yeah,
I
we had
think
that
it's
conversation.
is it afternoon? Is it evening?
I
I think it's an afternoon.
yeah, I think I'm willing to call it afternoon because it's still sunny out. That
And
seems to be a
just to
good
be
dividing line.
technical, it is after the noon hour.
Right.
So
Yeah,
anything
correct.
from 12:01 p.m. to
To midnight, I guess.
11:59 a.m. is
Right.
afternoon.
There you go. There you go.
All right.
I'm just googling that, by the way.
Oh, good.
You
The
know,
Never
first
know
question has
exactly
been
the thing.
asked.
see,
When is
I
afternoon
actually
over?
had a debate in a project room once about the difference between cake and muffins.
Right.
Because I mean, these are the kinds of questions that you really need to dig
Have to be
into.
answered.
They just because there's no clean dividing line.
Yeah. You mean cupcakes
Correct.
and muffins or
Well, just I mean, because there's a whole because you've got muffins, bread, cake. Because there's a lot of overlap here. Because is banana bread? Is that really a bread? I could take the same thing and put it in a muffin tin, and now they're the banana bread muffins. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
All right. Well, let's get on to the other questions because I'm
That's
sure
probably best.
as debatable as all these things are, let's get on. All right, here we go.
So, thank you for everybody that came back. I see Karam is back and asking a bunch of questions. Thank you so much. So the first question we have from yesterday, while we sort today's questions, is so now that we can't meet face to face, what online tools do we have to do event storming?
Yeah,
Say
that's
again, please.
how,
I
how do we do remote event storming, Jakub? Especially
Okay.
since that's what we've already done.
So there's a nice article by Alberto Brandolini, who is the father of the technique, and basically the article came out like I think 1 month ago. So when the pandemic was already a thing. Before that, we used to say that hey, you don't do remote event storming because you lose the body language, you lose what happens in the classroom or whenever you do the event storming. So you lose a lot of things. But nowadays the only possible option is to do it online. Still, there are some levels of event storming, like big picture event storming, when you try to understand what is going on at the organization. Then you have process level and design level. For process level and design level, I've been always using. I've been happy with Miro.com. That's the software we've been showing yesterday. But again, it's like a last resort. Like if you cannot do it on site, feel free to use any tool that fits your needs. In my case, it was always Miro.com. I think it's a wonderful tool. How about you, Nate? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, there's certainly other things you can try and experiment with, and I strongly advise you to try stuff. Right? I mean, that's what we have to do in these times is experiment and see what works, and keep keep what works, throw away what doesn't. But no, I would second Miro.
Yeah. But keep in mind, it's just a replacement for regular, good old-fashioned on-site event storming.
But it's, you know, the only option today, right?
The only, I guess. I mean, I guess
Depends where
so.
you are.
Yes. Depends on where you are. Yes.
So we have another question. The first question today on manifests. The attendee says, I noticed some people are putting manifest in the same repo as their source code. Some people don't. Do you have any thoughts about this? People who use scaffold tend to do this more.
I don't think I have strong opinions. I mean, yeah, this feels almost a little tabs versus spaces. You know, do what you think is best. I don't know. Jakub, you got thoughts on that?
I have no idea, in fairness. Like, I don't know what to say. If it works at your organization, do it if you have benefits. If it doesn't work, stop doing that. I don't think there is like a golden rule, like do it or don't. It's as you mentioned, Nate, it's like tabs versus spaces.
It's a little bit related to a question we got yesterday, whether when you're doing architecture, should you concentrate more on business goals or on concepts, like architectural concepts?
Well, I would argue that's the art of being an architect, is how do you take those business requirements, the business capabilities, and make sure that you've got the right technical capabilities to support that. You know, I've spent a fair amount of time being an architect, talking to people about being an architect, all that kind of fun stuff. And what I think makes the job so challenging is the fact that you have to see across all these different disciplines. You can't just sort of pigeonhole into just technology. You have to see the bigger picture, and you have to sort of balance all these constraints off of one another to get things in the right position to support these business needs. And sometimes that means you have to be the adult in the room. You have to be realistic. You know, we all think we're going to have 7 billion customers. The reality is you probably won't. So how do you sort of balance that against the need to be able to grow as the business hopefully gets more and more successful? And you know, but that's, I think, part of the challenge of the role is trying to see all the different angles and not getting locked into shiny new technology.
Correct. So I would add one thing. I think the best definition, in my humble opinion, for architecture is as follows. Architecture would be described as set of decisions you have made over time. It's like a first level derivative of decisions you've made over some past time, right? And each of the decisions in isolation should be taken into account all of the architectural drivers that you know. And there are different drivers, like business requirements. So now we talk about business things, like what business people want, to business capabilities, but also like how much money do I have? Or maybe, do I know this technology? Did I have luck with this technology in previous project? Or maybe not. Do I have knowledge about this? How skilled are my developers, and so on and so forth? Like, what's the life cycle of this project? Is it going to be live for 1 week or maybe 2 months? Is it an experiment, or maybe it's a strategic product that we are building for next 10 years? So those factors, they can change the architectural decision drastically. So you have to take into account not only the business requirements, not only the technical things like scalability, quality attributes, and so on and so forth, but also all of those, I call them, I don't know, project factors or organizational factors, something like that.
Yeah, that's a great point about the sort of where your team is at. You know, you if you've got a bunch of fairly new developers right out of school and you try to give them the most complicated architecture possible, they're going to struggle to succeed with that. If you've got a really deeply experienced team that knows the language, the tech stack inside out, you might be able to get away with some things that you couldn't with a younger team. And you know, that's really the challenge of taking, again, that big picture view, not just focused on one or two details.
Correct.
So that goes back to your point from yesterday's presentation on why culture is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
More so than technology, right? Sometimes.
I would share one thing. It's a story from, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. Doesn't really matter. what happens here, I hope stays in here. Is it recording? Oh, no, I'm not.
It's on the internet,
Anyways,
so it's going to last forever. So I wouldn't name any names, buddy.
let's say my friend was supposed to store some JSONs in the database, right? And then read them. Store and read, nothing fancy. There were some requests to some risk management system, right? Store the JSON and then load it when it's needed. Very simple. And the friend of mine thought, hey, I need a document database for that because I'm storing and retrieving JSON from the database, right? So I need, you know what's popular right now? The one which starts with M and ends with O, I guess so. And there is N in the middle. So I need that. Give me that. At the time, I don't mean we, they had only
This hypothetical
Postgres.
friend.
Yeah, they only had Postgres at the organization. But as a matter of fact, you can successfully store and retrieve JSON from Postgres, and it was supported back then. So when they talked to the architect, the conclusion was, hey, we can use that without having to bring all of this operational complexity with supporting a new database for us, because we don't know how to install that. We don't know how to provision that. We'll have to learn that. And this is already in production. We can reuse that, do it, because there is no other architectural driver that this other database, which starts with M, gives you that you don't have already in production. That was the end of the story. So from what I heard, they ended up with JSON B in Postgres.
Yeah, that's the art of architecture right there, and hopefully the architect in that situation did a good job of explaining to that team why that was the right way to go. It's too often we as technologists get so locked in on the shiny new thing, and I really want to put this on my resume, and I call it resume-driven design. I didn't coin that. I don't remember where I first heard it, but we're all tempted by that, and we see that time and time again in our industry. People adopt a new technology not because it's the right decision for what's in front of them, but because they just want to put it on their CV. And I get that. I mean, it's part of being in this industry. You got to play with new toys, but that's again where that sort of adult supervision has to step in and say, well, we've already got something that does what we need it to do. It's proven, it's in production, we know how to support it. You're adding an awful lot of variables to the equation just to bring in something that starts with M and ends with O. And I won't go any further because every time I bring it up, I get in trouble. So I'm just going to leave it there when it comes to that particular database. But that's hard. That's part of the job is having that adult supervision and being able to look at those decisions and say, yep, this is really the right way to go for us in this circumstance.
So one question from someone that returned from yesterday, Kuram. For Spring Cloud Stream, how does one work with AWS, SQS, SNS, or MQ? It seems the Cloud Stream does not seem to have binders for the mentioned message brokers. Only AWS Kinesis binders available.
Yeah, so basically, I think like at least 6 months ago, Spring Cloud Stream supported, as mentioned, AWS Kinesis, RabbitMQ, right? Kafka and something else. I don't think it supports MQ and or SNS, but the service provided interface, it's so easy to implement. So there is it's not that hard to implement your own binder if you need that. Yeah, I don't think we support SQS for that. I would have to double check. What do you think, Nate?
That might be a good question for a future Spring 1.2 or virtual, like say when Spencer's on the call.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Another question from Sweet Killer 9, someone that we see a lot in Tanzu Tuesdays. So as a Java developer with 4 years experience who wants to start with cloud native, Java, and Kubernetes, what are the major steps to follow in order to be successful in this path?
Oh boy, there's a lot in that question. I mean, I would need to know a little more, I think, probably about your circumstances. But the first thing that I think you should try to do is just make sure you level set on where you currently are. Like, what's your legacy portfolio look like? Do you already have 400 Java apps running in production that are not cloud native, and do you want to make them cloud native? What does that look like? Yeah, and that's not a straightforward question to answer. You've got to do some work to figure out what your portfolio can even support. I did this at my previous company, and what you quickly discover is of your portfolio, some chunk are great candidates to go to the cloud in some way, shape, or form, because you're going to continue to invest in them. They've got good business value, and hopefully that transition is relatively easy, or at least is worth the effort to make that transition. You've got some where the case is maybe more of a coin flip. Maybe it's a good choice, maybe it's not. We need to delve a little deeper. And then you've got some that this shouldn't go to the cloud at all, because this is something we're going to run off in 6 months. This is not a strategic product for us. This is something that we're going to move away from. And so there's really no justification for making that investment to move it. So that's the first thing I would do, is just make sure you know what your current circumstance looks like. And then once you kind of got that bucket, you sort of pick something that's a good candidate. And there's a lot of different ways you can break that down, but one that Rohit taught me is that you look at it in terms of what's the effort to migrate it and what's the business value. And hopefully you start with the ones that are low effort, high business value, kind of that low hanging fruit. Get some momentum, get some credibility, get your feet wet, and then you just kind of move your way through your portfolio from there, moving on to, again, the ones with high benefit, but maybe more work. And then, eventually you're going to have a whole chunk that you just kind of have to, they're not going to make it to the valley beyond.
I would just add that maybe if you don't want to migrate anything at your organization, or you don't need to do so, and still you want to learn some patterns regarding cloud native architecture and so on and so forth, there is a lot of free knowledge in the internet. There are books written by some folks at Pivotal and now VMware, so feel free to grab one of those and give it a go.
So we have another question focusing like when to use event storming. So they want to know, can we use event storming for both sync, IVR, chatbot type interactions, as well as async type of use cases?
So event storming doesn't have anything to do with the type of communication you use, whether it's async, or maybe it's sync, if it's REST, if it's GraphQL, if it's so, it doesn't really matter. Like the purpose of doing event storming, like we've done yesterday, is to understand the business process. Where is the value? Where are the problems? Where should we focus more? Where can we focus less? Where should we put our best people? Where can we buy some software because that's a generic subdomain? So most probably you don't talk about communication patterns during event storming session. Maybe at some point, if you go deep down to so-called design level event storming, maybe then you will have some communication, but it would rather be like if it's a query or if it's a command, things like this. I wouldn't go down there to the specific way of communicating between some chunks of your system. Anyways, it's a technique designed in order to understand the problem and to model the problem so that it's represented as something that can be understood both by IT people and also by business people, so that we have common understanding, right? So this is the purpose, the main purpose, I would say, of doing event storming. Whether you use some technology down there doesn't really matter. I've been involved in event storming sessions, trust me, which ended up with the statement, you know what? We don't need software for that. It's already done. We can use Excel for 2 weeks, and then we can see if that works, right?
Yep.
Or maybe the other conclusion would have been, you know what? There are so many hotspots. There are so many risks that we hadn't taken into account before, that we are not ready to start this project, right? And look how much money was saved just because doing this kind of analysis for 2 or 3 days, because otherwise the project would have kicked off, probably lasted like 2 or 3 months or 2 or 3 weeks. Some code will be written, people will be sad about throwing away the code later on, and also the money would have been spent. So this is the main purpose of doing event storming. Anything to add, Nate?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of event storming as a way of understanding that problem domain, looking for the bits that we don't really understand and just sort of exploring that, getting everybody on the same page. And that's a huge part of this. You make a great point about it can help you even discover if software is the right answer. And I think I mean, I get it because we're software people. So our answer is always more software because that's what we do for a living. We get paid to write software. So yes, let me write you some software. It's like if you go to an orthopedic surgeon, there's a decent chance they're going to say, yeah, what you need is surgery because that's what I get paid to do. So I'd really like to cut you open. So I think it's challenging though to get people to understand those instances where Excel's good enough. This is something you're going to do for 2 weeks or a month and then throw it away. It doesn't require this huge investment, or even to your point, we just don't know enough here. This we need to spend another month digging and figuring stuff out. And that's hard because the way a lot of organizations approach this is like the budget process. Somebody successfully navigates the political waters and gets $1 million or $2 million or whatever, and then we just go. We don't get a chance to actually ask, is this a good idea? And I think everybody has been on a project where you recognize we shouldn't be doing this. This project should be killed. But it can't be because some VP has staked their political capital to it. And so we're all stuck on this death march until somebody higher up the food chain comes in and knifes the project.
Correct.
So I just wanted to follow up a little bit since we had a lot of very similar questions. Would you say in a new engagement, do you always do event storming? Is that is it your go-to for?
I don't think anything's an always. I get really this is where my get off my lawn, I guess, attitude kicks in. You have to be pragmatic. Dogmatism is not a good thing when it comes to software. It's good. Be opinionated, that's fine, but you need to be able to look at the situation and say what makes sense here. A good friend of mine who unfortunately passed away a year or so ago made that point to me when I was much younger, and he said, a lot of people come in and their attitude is, well, testing is the most important thing. So we got to do testing. He was on one project where big legacy app, no unit tests. And so his gut reaction was, well, maybe I should start pushing testing. Well, then he took kind of a step back and realized the person with the least amount of experience on that project had been there for 10 years. So the developers knew the code inside and out. And while testing is important, it was not where he started that engagement. And to me, that was just part of his maturity and part of his skill set was the ability to say, I don't just have one plan here. I adapt to the situation in front of me. So I would expect it to be the same for this. Is event storming useful? Absolutely. Do you use it on every engagement? I wouldn't say every, but it's very helpful when, hey, we don't really understand what the problem is. We don't really understand how to break this apart. We don't know where the bounded contexts are, so it can certainly help answer some questions, but I'd be hesitant to say anything is the always applied.
Yeah, but I would just add that from my experience, I haven't seen a better technique to understand the problem than event storming. But yes, it's not like always I have to do that. I've been using that in various different manners, like for a new project when you do the kickoff, but sometimes and quite frequently I've been using event storming to understand the current solution, the current architecture, and the current let's say business process which is already implemented and it's out there for years, and I need to refactor something. Like before VMware and before Pivotal, I was working as an independent consultant, so I would come to a company for, I don't know, one week and trying to help them to overcome their biggest pain point. So I needed to understand what's the biggest pain point, and trust me, sometimes that's a very valuable information. What's the biggest pain point? What should we solve for the what should we solve as starters, right? I mean, I don't know how, but at least I know what. And then I can dig into the code base and do some refactoring if it's needed. So yes, event storming can be used in various situations. It doesn't really matter. It has to be done like always. I don't like the word always. It's the same like with stand-ups. Like I have to do stand-up every day at 10 a.m. Why? Like, why do I need to do so? Does it make sense? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to do that. If it doesn't make sense, if it makes sense to skip one stand-up or if it makes sense to sit for stand-up just 1 day a week, I'm going to do so. You know what? Because this is just a tool that helps me to grow, and I want to adjust this tool so that it fits me well, right?
That's a great point, Jakub. I think so often when you run into dogmatism, what it boils down to is someone who doesn't really know why we're doing this thing. It's cargo cult sometimes, and instead of asking, why is this useful, or what do we get out of this, we just do it all the time. We just have to. Like, okay, but why? Well, don't ask silly questions. Like, no, that's a great question. You should be able to explain why we have this concept of a stand-up, why it's useful, and when it might not be something we need to do every single day. And yeah, that's again, I'm not a fan of dogmatism.
You guys
I just want to show that I was speaking from the perspective of a person who actually used to do a lot of cargo culting. Like when I was a junior developer, trust me, I was really spoiled as junior developer. Like I wouldn't join a project if it's not a test-driven development way, and so on and so forth. So I have done my bad things during the so-called career.
We all have that's what experience gives us. A very common question that I get is how many years of experience should I have before I become an architect? And you've all seen the varied from someone who's a couple years out of college and somehow gets the title, and someone who's been doing this 20 years and they don't have the title. And what I think it boils down to is you need to have been on a project long enough to see the consequences of your decisions. And those consequences can be positive, they can be negative, and probably both. But that to me is the key. And that's the real benefit of having 10, 15, 20 years of experience is you hear those echoes of the past, and I know you're supposed to do it that way, but here's how you really can do it. And here's a little twist that I know about that I discovered on this project. I've been through the pain. Now I can help you avoid that pain because I know where that pothole is.
Correct. So my simple test for determining who is the architect is as follows. Like, do you know like 3 or 4 biggest issues, biggest risks at your last project? What would you do better if you could start this project one more time? Things like that. Like this actually differs. The answer differs when it comes to a person who just has the label of an architect. You know what I mean.
Yeah, there should be an answer to what would you do differently.
Yeah, there should be an answer. Yes.
Yep.
And the answer shouldn't be nothing.
Right. Yeah, that's scary because it's like, oh, you're not learning. You're not learning from experience. That's scary.
To give I just wanted to give a little bit more context to that question, since you guys actually answered the other part to that question and covered it. But Masoud was saying that he is working in a project for 2 years where they do event sourcing for absolutely everything, and he just thinks it's overkill for every single project, and he feels it's a gimmick.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's a gimmick, but if you are applying it when you don't need to, then I can see where you'd feel that way. I guess the way I look at it is if you already understand the domain and the problem, event storming is probably not going to teach you a lot. And going through a multiple day event storming session is probably is a waste of your time. Now, it could be valuable to spend a half an hour digging on some part that hurts or some part you don't quite understand. But again, if you've got a team of people that's been in this domain for 10 years and your business partner is sitting right there next to you and they've been doing it for 30 years, you might already have a pretty good understanding of where the crunchy bits are, and the technique might not show you that much. So, again, to me, that's the idea of always applying anything is just dangerous.
Yeah, I think the question was about event sourcing, not event storming.
Oh,
Maybe.
sorry, my bad.
That was a very great rant. I've enjoyed listening to that.
Oh, you know me, man. I get out of soapbox anytime. I'd say the same thing about event sourcing, though. I mean, anything you apply all the time just because is just wrong.
Just replace storming with X or ABC, and
exactly
what you said stays correct, right?
Yep.
So I just want to add 2 cents. I've been seeing people who would say that, hey, I'm doing event sourcing for everything, and I have been successful with that. Maybe if you have been successful with that, keep doing that. But if you feel that somewhere down there, it feels like a little bit of overkill, like then what Nate said it's a perfect answer for that question. Right? But I've seen people saying, hey, I use it everywhere, even if it's create, read, update, delete project or product. I will go with sourcing because I'm experienced. I have tools. My team is experienced. Then probably fine, do it because you know what to do. You know all the things that are different in normal snapshot-based persistence, right? So in that case, yes, you almost have just the benefits. You don't have any drawbacks because you have the experience, right? But if you are new to the technique, applying it everywhere probably is not the way to go. If you want to learn how to do that, probably start with the first place where it makes sense. That's a different story, how to find the place where it makes sense. But let's say you found it and then you apply there. It shouldn't probably be like that. The most important bit of your application. It shouldn't be also like something which we can completely ignore, but something in the middle, and then learn from your experiences, and then you can grow and apply the pattern in different places. And it applies not only to even sourcing; it applies to different things too.
Everything. Yep. Tools, languages, databases, they're just a tool. And then the challenge for us is to know when to apply that particular tool. My analogy is always hammers. If you go to your big box retailer, there isn't just one kind of hammer. There's a whole freaking aisle full of hammers, and they all have specific uses. What separates someone who's actually competent at carpentry and myself is they know when to use which hammer. I like to joke that one hammer is more than sufficient for me to screw up any project around the house. I'm a software guy. Hardware's not my thing. But when you have craftsmen that do this, that are experts in the field, they know when to use the framing hammer and when to use the finishing hammer and when to use the sledgehammer. And I think what happens too often in our industry is, someone has success with the sledgehammer and they're like, this is the answer for every problem. No, it's a great thing to use when you need a sledgehammer. It's a terrible thing to use when you need a finishing hammer. And so that to me is the maturity that you get with experience, hopefully, is to know when to use which tool.
So another question is, in our domain model, we have a need to communicate with an external vendor that is a bit involved. What are the trade-offs in having that communication be a separate service that each bounded context utilizes versus embedded in each bounded context?
So this is actually one of the principles that we use when it comes to should that be a microservice, and that's just basically as a facade pattern, be able to step in and abstract away some of that. And my gut reaction is that's a good approach, because then it gives you one place to change if that external third-party thing changes, as opposed to changing it every single place, proxy or potentially an adapter, depending on what we're trying to do. It's very common. I've done that throughout my career, and I think it actually makes a lot of sense. I know, Jakub, one of the things you and I were talking about, I don't know if this was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but you were on a project where they spun part of the functionality out to a microservice for like legal compliance issues to make sure that it was the only part that needed it. So to me, that's similar kind of thing, right? Is we know we don't want everything to have to deal with this, and it's a way of simplifying that considerably.
I would just add that, let's say we are service A and we are communicating with service B, which is this separate service, external service deployed by external vendor. We don't have control over that, meaning we don't have control over the API, meaning we don't have the control whether it's backwards compatible or not. We don't have control of anything in there, right? Which means from service A to B, we are now coupled. Coupling to something which is stable, it's fine, but this is not stable. This is unstable. But if you have something in the middle, I'm not saying it's a separate microservice. It might be just a few lines of code which translate this model into our model and vice versa. By the way, it's called anti-corruption layer because it's anti-corruption layer. So then you are coupled from the perspective of service A to something which is stable, right? And only the ACL, the anti-corruption layer, is coupled to something which is not stable, meaning you can have more services coupled to the ACL, B, C, D, E, And every time you need to change something because of the vendor who changed something without informing you, then only the ACL changes. So you can read about this and more of the related techniques when it comes to mapping between two different contexts in any domain-driven design book. I recommend, of course, the one written by Eric Evans. I think there is a chapter dedicated to context mapping.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Oh, actually, that reminds me. Somebody asked about the book you were recommending yesterday, Jakub.
That was one of them, but there's also the event storming book too that you mentioned.
The event storming book. Yep.
Yeah, so one is Introducing Event Storming by Alberto Brandolini, right? And the other one is Domain-Driven Design by Eric Evans.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you. So we have another question kind of on microservices. So please give your thoughts on how best to deploy UI code versus API backend code. We currently have applications that we deploy as Spring Boot apps, and they contain both API and UI front-end code written in React. I'm thinking it might be best to deploy them separately, especially since I'm thinking about breaking out the apps into multiple jars with more granular functionality, functional orientation.
Yeah, I guess my first reaction on that would be to ask what the rate of change is. Is the rate of change is the same, splitting them up doesn't necessarily buy you much. I mean, if you're in a situation where anytime I change sort of that back end JSON pump, I have to change the front end, keeping them together is not the worst thing you can do. If they have completely different cadences, completely different forces working on them, then it might be simpler to split them apart. You know, the challenge anytime we go more distributed, there's more moving parts, there's more things you have to tie back together. It does kind of ramp up the complexity. That might be worth it though, if it gets you some of those benefits and allows them to iterate at the pace that they each need to iterate at.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't add anything to that.
Thanks, Nate. So what are some communication patterns between aggregates and DDD? Is it basically messages? What are some options available in the Spring Framework?
So the options are completely, I would say, framework agnostic. What you think about when you talk about aggregates is that an aggregate should be a consistent unit of transaction, right? So everything that needs to be changed at once, and that should be really immediately consistent, that should be inside one aggregate. If you have invariants that should be immediately consistent and they span across different aggregates, probably you have wrong boundaries. Means that basically every request to my application should just take one, if it's a command, should take one aggregate, do something with this aggregate, and maybe save it back if the command was successful, right? Because that's the unit of persistence, that's the unit of the business transaction. But then if you need to communicate with other aggregate, you have different options. Like you can use eventual consistency, meaning after this transaction, the thread is released, and in a different thread, I'm going to communicate with the different aggregates so that I have huge scalability and better user experience, because the user who invoked the command to the first aggregate doesn't have to wait, right? We did what we needed to do and nothing more, and then we can continue, and in another thread we are going to notify the different aggregate. The problem is that if you want to deal with eventual consistency, then you have problems like, do I have to deliver this message at once, maybe at least once, maybe at most once? What's the guarantee when it comes to communication? If it's at most once, meaning one time or 0 times the message can be lost, that's an easy part, because you just created another thread and you try to communicate with the different aggregate. And then for that, you can use, for instance, Spring events with the listener in the different transaction. But if you want to make sure that the different aggregate was synchronized or will be synchronized eventually, then you are talking about inbox pattern, outbox pattern. You have to think about idempotency when it comes to aggregates, interfaces, and so on and so forth, and some persistence. When I said inbox and outbox, basically under hood, that's a persistent storage for your messages. So it gets complicated. So maybe you should start thinking whether it's okay to every now and then store and modify 2 aggregates in one transaction, which is not done by the book. It's the rule of thumb is you should be modifying 1 aggregate per transaction, but it's a trade-off, right? If I have to do it once in here, doesn't bother me that much. I'm breaking the rule, but I don't have to think about this infrastructure complexity that it's brought together with the at least once delivery thing, inbox and outbox pattern. Then it's probably fine. And those aggregates, they commonly communicate over events. That's the rule of thumb. But I've seen successful implementations who would just in an application service just do 2 commands to do 2 different aggregates. I know that's not how it should be done. The rule is modify 1 aggregate in 1 application service in 1 transaction. But if you want to do it quickly and it doesn't bother you that much and it doesn't bring you that much bad code and you're happy with that, then it's a trade-off.
So for our next question, what is the best open source framework in 2020? Spring. I'm just kidding. So just to read out the
That was a good one.
What's the best open source framework in 2020 you recommend for event sourcing, not event-driven, and domain-driven design? Second part to that question, can Kafka be considered a solution for both event-driven and event sourcing?
So I've been learning about event sourcing from Greg Young, who is like a guru when it comes to event sourcing. And he always says, don't use frameworks for event sourcing because it's just a few lines of code. So don't do it. Don't build your own framework for that. I have built my own framework back in the day for that in one of the companies. I've seen people having quite successful deployments and setups with Axon framework for event sourcing, especially when it comes to Java world, because Axon is from Java world, and it also integrates nicely with Spring Boot in Spring.
It's pretty hard to give an answer to what's the best open source framework to do X when you have to ask, well, what language do you want to support? I mean, if you're a Java shop and I come in and pitch a Ruby solution at you, that's probably not the smartest thing I could do, and vice versa. So, I think a lot of it depends on your tech stack, what you're comfortable with, and I do think we as an industry gravitate too much towards, oh, let's build a framework. Let's build a framework. One of my friends has this lovely quote. He says, meta work is more interesting than work. So yeah, I can put that front end on that relational database or add that field, or I can build a framework for generating UIs that, and that's a lot more interesting because I've already built so many of these other things. It's just the same thing again and again, but building a framework, ooh, yeah, that's cool work. So we should always be just a little hesitant on that because it's so easy to kind of get down that rabbit hole and realize, yeah, I really didn't need anything extra here. I could have just, to your point, Jakub, 3 lines of code would have done it.
Maybe 4.
Oh yeah, I mean 4 or 5. It just depends on how succinct you are, I guess.
Yeah, and how expressive the language of your choice is, right?
Right. Yeah, are we talking Clojure? Are we talking, something else? Perl?
And the second part to that question was, can you use Kafka for both event-driven and event sourcing?
So for event sourcing, there is the problem with Kafka because there is no easy way to make sure that 2 or 3 or more different threads are going to send events to the same topic, meaning it's hard to implement optimistic locking. You would have to do it on the application layer, for instance, with an actor model or something like that. For event-driven, I've been using Kafka for event-driven architecture for many years, and for streaming works fine.
Awesome, thank you. So Lala asks, can different microservices share the same table? For example, one will write and one will read at a later time. Duplicating the same data to another table seems to be overkill.
Yeah, this is another one of those where we have to get rid of dogmatism. And the Platonic ideal would say, no, all microservices should have their own data store. And it's important for us to kind of ask, like, why did we arrive at that? You know, why did that start as the definition? And a lot of what that boils down to is anybody who's ever had to integrate at the database level knows you should never integrate at the database level. You know, they all make a dogmatic statement just to prove myself wrong. When you have multiple services talking to the same table, you run into this situation where I need to change the schema to do this, or I want to add this, and now that breaks you, and you know, that's problematic. You know, that's part of why I think you'd see some of these schemaless databases popping up these days. So if I control both services, then I can control that rate of change. I can control what that migration looks like, and so it's less risky for me to share the table. Where it becomes problematic is if my team controls one service and Jakub's team controls another service and we're trying to talk the same database. That's where we run into some issues. But I think I'd rather see us try to find that middle ground. You know, I think that's another challenge we face in this industry is we tend to sort of pendulum swing from one way to the other. We're like, everything in one table, oh, that's terrible. Okay, well, everything in their own data store, well, that's got its own set of problems. There's a happy middle ground here where, you know, these three services are all working on the same data, and rather than me have to create a whole bunch of stuff to aggregate data together or duplicate the fact that I'm talking to the same stuff and how do I keep the data in sync, well, you know what, these three services can talk to the same store, that's okay. And then these two can talk to their own data store, and this one maybe has its own data store. And again, do what makes sense and do what's logical and pragmatic, as opposed to getting caught up in, well, but the definition says. You know, you have to still think and use your own experience as a guide here. That's one of the things that frustrates me so much, is when people again kind of fall back on, well, but I have to do it this way. You still have to use your brain and say, is this the right decision for the project that I'm working on? Is it right for the forces that are facing me?
That seems like a really scary thing to do, or like very like that decision seems like very difficult to make.
Yeah, and again, that's where experience has to be your guide. And so we have to remember that the core to me of Agile is the fact that we have these nested feedback loops, and I'm reacting to that feedback. You know, so where I get really frustrated, God, I'll never forget this project I was on where I swear to God, every retro was the same thing. You know, we'd bring up the same things and the PM would be like, oh yeah, we should change that. And we never changed it. And so people just got completely, we're just like, forget it. What's the point of doing a retro? Because you are not going to change anything. So let's please stop wasting our time with this. And so the goal should be, all right, hey, we tried having these as three separate data stores and man, it sucks. Well, let's try putting them together. Hey, that's better. Or, oh, actually, this is way worse. Cool. You know, these shouldn't be, it shouldn't take you 6 months to figure that out. It's the kind of thing where hopefully in a couple weeks or a couple months, you're like, yeah, this is a problem. Let's change it. And then you work to change it. You know, to me, that's where we get stuck is, you know, we identify that something's a problem and then refuse to change it. It's like, if it's not working, fix it. I mean, that's Agile in a nutshell, right? What's working, what's not. Do more of what's working and change the stuff that's not. It isn't that complicated. You know, we add so many other things in and placemats and all this other stuff. And it's like, you know what that's the core of what we're trying to do here is try to make things better, you know. Sorry, I'll put my soapbox away here.
You should write your own Agile manifesto, Nate. I would sign it.
Well, but that's another great point, right? If you look at the Agile Manifesto, it says we prefer this over that, not that we do none of this. You know, and that's again where people have a tendency to take that and read into it what they want on these kinds of things. And so they look at it and say, oh, good, I don't have to document. I can just cowboy code. No, that is clearly not what is stated there. If that's what you're interpreting, that's a different problem. You know, so yeah, that to me is another part of this, right? Is just, hey, you got to react to this and don't get so darn dogmatic.
Coming back to the question, I would just say that if you really need to have a truly microservice way of doing the architecture, then I would say database per microservice is the default, like it's the start. And then if you need to change that, I've seen successful setups that would have like 2 microservices talking to the same database, for instance, because of the performance reasons. Mm-hmm. Then use your own brain, as Nate suggested. And yes, if you need to justify this decision, which probably wouldn't be something that should be done by the book, right? It's totally fine, I would say. It's fine to break the rule if you know what's the point of breaking the rule and why you are doing that.
Exactly.
Okay. Looks like we're out of time. And that was our last question for today.
All right. Well, there's some great questions. I just want to thank everybody for hanging out with us again today. This has been great. This was a good experiment, and I'm glad a bunch of folks came back and gave Jakub and I something to talk about. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Can they reach you on Twitter in case they want to?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're free to Twitter stalk us. We should probably make sure that gets sent out in the wrap-up email as well, so everybody knows how to get a hold of us. But yeah, I'm NT Schutta, and Jakub, you are?
Sure. Yes, I'm Jakub Pilimon. If you want to say this was all nonsense, probably the best way is to do it via Twitter, right?
Absolutely. That's the best level of discourse on Twitter. You're wrong, and here's why.
Thank you very much for answering everybody's questions. I learned a lot. I'm not an architect, but I feel like I understand architects a little bit more and the pain they have to go through. It feels like they have to deal with so many different conflicting interests. So thank you very much for helping all our attendees and people that are going to be viewing this on our YouTube channel, which you can find on the Tanzu YouTube channel.
Yeah, we can. Sorry, I've got my coworkers here talking too. Quiet. Hey, everybody. So I'll bring one of my coworkers.
There we go, the fuzzy coworker.
Yeah. Hold on. 2 seconds. I'm having a meltdown over here from another.
It's fun when we have all our coworkers around, isn't it, Bob?
I know it works like the charm that makes the world go round. All right, my friends, you are all awesome. Yvonne, thank you for leading that and sharing all of your knowledge, Nate and Jakub. Yes, we have a Tanzu YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and type in Tanzu, we have our own channel that will have both yesterday and today's videos. I think yesterday's video is already up even. So
yes, I believe it is.
Bonus. Spring One tour next month. We have the CI/CD experience with Kubernetes. That's going to be amazing. Let me find out exactly who's in that one. It is, Cora Iberclyde, who's incredible. She just was on Tanzu Tuesdays this last week talking about images for containers. It was incredible. And then Andreas Evers, who will probably be coming from Belgium. So it looks like we're going to have another US EU collaboration, which will be a lot of fun. Andreas is an incredible talent as well. So happy to have Andreas and Cora next month. Again, you can register at springonetour.io. And if you can't, for whatever reason you forget, we are on the twitch.tv/makejar.not.war. So that's been live streaming yesterday and today's show. So like Spencer Gibb is on over there. Sweet Killer Nine's over there. So some of our usual Tanzu Tuesday suspects are over there. We also have Spring One Virtual, springone.io. The call for papers is over, everybody. Sorry, that was yesterday. But you can still register to attend. That'll all be happening September 2nd and 3rd. So again, springone.io for our spring virtual tour. It's going to be incredible. The DevOps portal for Tanzu is live and ready for you to go and learn and join in on the community. And that's at tanzu.vmware.com/developer. And just so much great information about helping create and build application software for the enterprise. Hold on one moment, please.
We love children. You know, I have to say that has been one of the helpful things in this whole thing, right? Is people are starting to see their coworkers, furry friends, and their family, and I think it's a good reminder that we are a multidimensional being.
I hope everybody was doing a fine job entertaining themselves. Oh, the joys of being a manager, right?
Right.
That's what a parent is in these days of working
Pretty
at
much.
home. And I'm just gonna make sure I've got one more thing. Yes, of course. If please tweet us at Spring1Tour, hashtag Spring1Tour. It's always fun to engage in the socials. If you have, did you guys let them know that if they had any more questions, they could reach out to you on the socials as well?
Yes, we already talked about the level of social discourse on Twitter. So
Wonderful.
Looking forward to it.
Use sparingly, wisely. I don't know.
I think it's mostly for shooting pictures of your dinner. That's what
the
Paul's
camera-
taught me.
Yes, exactly. Or whatever you're drinking and
Exactly.
the camera must eat. All right. Well, we've had a great 2 days. I hope you have as well. Please join us next month. Again, it's the third Wednesday and Thursday of the month, specifically June 24th and 25th, where we're going to have Cora and Andreas talking to us about the CI/CD experience. Very important. The Kubernetes edition, since Kubernetes is all Kubernetes. And anyway, so we have an amazing team that's been working on this. Jamie DiMartini, Tasha Eisenberg, Ron, I'm blanking on your last name. Hold on. Gleason, there it is. And Ivan, Jakub, Nate, myself. Oh, and Paul, of course, Paul Tchaikovsky-Golevsky. Or as he would prefer if Jakub could say it, because
Jakub is the only one who actually can say his last name properly.
Both was good. I have to say, better than Paul for sure.
Well, thank you very much.
Doesn't even know how to pronounce his own last name.
Yeah, well, these are the troubled times that he lives in his whole life, walking around a nameless man. All right. Well, anyway, and yeah, my monkeys have run away. My dogs have run away, so I can't give you any more dogs for parting. But anyway, I think that's it, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Stay healthy. Everybody,
wash your hands.
That's right.
Bye.
Cheers.